What if the woman pushing the mop down the hallway is the one who holds the keys to the entire building? What if the person everyone ignored was actually the owner all along? This is not just a story. It's a quiet revolution, a tale of resilience, truth, and the power of those we often overlook. Welcome to the floor below the glass ceiling. Before we dive in, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to this channel, not just to support the stories we share, but to be part of a community that believes in unseen strength and untold journeys. And for everyone who has liked and subscribed, may goodness follow you always. May you be granted good health, ease in all your matters, freedom from debt, and relief from every difficulty. May those who are ill find healing, may your burdens be lifted, and may your days be filled with peace, purpose, and unexpected blessings. Thank you for being here. And after you've heard Rosa's journey, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which part of her story touched your heart the most? Share your thoughts. We read every single one. Now, let's begin with chapter 1 of The Floor Below the Glass Ceiling. Every morning at 4:45, Rosa Martinez arrived at the corner of Telegraph and 34th. The city was still half asleep, and the fog curled around the edges of parked cars like cigarette smoke. She parked her rust-colored Toyota quietly beneath the only street lamp that hadn't burned out. Keys jingled softly on her belt as she locked the door and walked toward the sleek glass building that stood 12 stories high in the center of downtown Oakland. Inside, the marble lobby echoed with her footsteps. No one greeted her. No one ever did. The reception desk sat empty until 9, and the cameras blinked silently overhead. Rosa tapped her badge, waited for the green light, then entered the maintenance wing. Her cart stood where she left it, supplies neatly arranged, mop head rinsed and dried, gloves folded. She wheeled it down the hall toward the service elevator, passing the portraits of corporate founders she knew better than most of the executives upstairs. Her late husband, Luis Martinez, once stood among them, one of the original 3 partners of Celestial Pacific Logistics, back when the company had only 2 trucks and a rented office behind a gas station. But there was no portrait of Luis now. After his death, his image had vanished from the walls, as if history could be rewritten by those who wrote the checks. Rosa pushed the button for the 6th floor. The elevator groaned and rumbled as it rose. For the last 15 years, Rosa had cleaned this building. Every corner, every stall, every splatter of coffee and ink. The executives who glanced at her never asked her name. The interns ignored her. The managers passed by as though she was part of the wall. Only the other night staff, the janitors, security guards, and the old man who refilled the vending machines, acknowledged her presence. They shared stories in Spanish or Tagalog, sometimes silence, always respect. On floor 6, Rosa began her rounds. She moved in a rhythm shaped by years of repetition. Trash bins first, then desktops, then windows. She moved silently, efficiently, her mind drifting to memories she could not always keep at bay. The way Luis used to laugh during late-night planning sessions. The way he scribbled ideas on napkins and turned them into contracts. How he trusted people too easily, including his 2 partners, Thomas Wexley and Gerald Chong, who now ran the company without a mention of the man who helped build it. She had never fought them. Not then. Not after the funeral. Not when the lawyers stopped returning her calls. Instead, she waited. She cleaned. She listened. She listened when the junior accountant talked on speakerphone about forged bonus reports. She listened when Gerald shouted at someone over severance packages, his door half open. She listened when a temp cried in the restroom because she had been fired for being 2 minutes late. Rosa listened and remembered. By the time the sun crept above the horizon, the office began to stir. People in suits and slacks filled the hallways with coffee and conversation. Rosa had already disappeared into the stairwell on her way back down. She did not linger. She did not make eye contact. But every once in a while she glanced at the names on the office doors. Not out of jealousy. Out of calculation. On her lunch break, Rosa sat alone in the loading dock, peeling an orange slowly. Her fingers were calloused, her back ached. But her mind was sharper than ever. She carried a notebook in her bag, small, leather-bound, filled with notes. Dates, names, transactions. Some written down years ago, others more recent. She had trusted only one person with the truth. A friend of Luis's from the early days. A soft-spoken attorney named David Lynn. After Luis's death, he was the only one who believed her when she said something wasn't right. For years, they had quietly pieced together records, located surviving documents, traced signatures. Rosa kept every paper in a locked box beneath her bed. But now the box was empty. The files had been delivered. It was almost time. That evening, as she scrubbed the boardroom floor, Rosa paused. She looked up at the long walnut table where Gerald once mocked Luis for wanting to offer profit sharing to drivers. The chandelier above sparkled like a crown no one had earned. The chairs were empty now, but not for long. Rosa dipped her mop again, slowly. The floor gleamed beneath her. And then, as if to herself, she whispered, "Soon." The library on San Pablo Avenue was quiet that morning. Rosa liked it that way. She preferred the quiet hum of knowledge over the sterile buzz of office lighting. It was one of the few places where she didn't feel invisible. The librarian, a soft-spoken woman with silver hair named Elise, always greeted her with a warm smile. Rosa settled into her usual corner, spreading a stack of folders across the table. The manila envelopes were frayed at the corners, but each one held something valuable. Contracts from the early days of Celestial Pacific Logistics, stock purchase agreements with Luis's signature, internal memos David had managed to collect from sympathetic former employees. One document in particular made her pause, a dated stock ledger listing her husband's 33% share. Initialed and notarized. She stared at it for a long time. Legally, Luis's shares had passed to her. But years ago, during the chaos after his funeral, Thomas and Gerald had quietly voted to dissolve the original partnership agreement, citing breach of fiduciary responsibility. The claim had been baseless, but Rosa didn't have the money or power to fight it then. They had erased her presence just as they erased Luis's. But they hadn't destroyed the paper trail. And Rosa had been collecting it piece by piece ever since. She gently smoothed the edges of a handwritten letter Luis had left for her in a safe deposit box. It wasn't long, but it had changed everything. He wrote of his doubts in the final months, of Gerald's manipulation, of Thomas's growing distance, of how they amended board decisions behind his back. He urged Rosa to protect what he had built, to finish what he had started. Her fingers tightened around the page. She closed the folder and rose to meet David, who had just walked in. He wore a tan jacket and a navy tie, slightly crooked as always. He looked tired. David had been quietly helping her for over a decade, reviewing documents, filing quiet claims, building a case with patience most people would never understand. A quiet warrior in a world of loud thieves. He sat across from her and opened his briefcase without a word. Inside was a draft, 43 pages long. It was the first formal motion to contest ownership of Luis's original shares and demand a forensic audit of Celestial's internal financial records. All it needed was Rosa's signature and a trigger. "We need a public leak," David said, voice low. "Once the media gets a whiff, Wexley and Chong won't be able to bury it. But it has to be undeniable. Something that links their corruption to recent firings. Maybe the bonus fraud." Rosa nodded slowly. Her eyes were calm. "I have something," she said. The previous month, she had picked up a crumpled printout near the shredder on the 8th floor. Someone had missed the machine. It was a spreadsheet with names, bonus amounts, and falsified timestamps. She had matched the names to employees who had been mysteriously let go in the last quarter. With Elise's help at the library, she had cross-referenced everything. The numbers didn't lie. They were manipulating payroll records to inflate executive bonuses while laying off drivers and warehouse staff for budget reasons. And the person who had printed that sheet, she had found out, was the finance assistant, barely 22, clearly nervous and gone without warning. David read the sheet slowly, nodding. "This is enough to push it public. But once we do this, you'll be visible. You understand that, right?" "I've been invisible long enough," Rosa replied. He handed her a pen. She signed the motion. By the time she left the library, the fog had lifted. The sun was climbing the downtown towers now, bouncing gold light off the glass and steel above her. Rosa walked slowly back to her car, where her janitor's uniform waited in the passenger seat. She changed in silence, folding her coat neatly, sliding her gloves on. As she tied her hair back, her reflection in the window caught her off guard. She didn't look like a janitor. She didn't look like someone who'd been ignored for 15 years. She looked like someone who had nothing left to lose. Back inside the building, her steps were calm, deliberate. She didn't clean that day. Instead, she watched. She walked past offices, took note of who was in meetings, who left doors open, who whispered near water coolers. She memorized every movement like a chess player scanning the board before the final checkmate. At lunch, she met Elise again in the back lot, handing her a flash drive. "El Diario still publishes exposés, right?" Rosa asked. Elise gave a knowing smile. "They're going to love this." The news hit like thunder. At 6:30 in the morning, El Diario de la Bahia published an exclusive exposé. The headline read, "Millions in executive bonuses as drivers get laid off. Inside the corruption at Celestial Pacific Logistics." By 7, the story had been picked up by local radio. By 8, it was trending on social media under the hashtag Celestial Scandal. And by 9, every phone inside the company's high-rise headquarters in downtown Oakland was ringing. Rosa arrived just before the chaos reached its peak. Her ID badge beeped softly as she entered through the side door reserved for janitorial staff. She walked through the hallway with a mop bucket in tow, but her eyes were on the monitors behind the front desk. News anchors were already speculating about illegal payouts, fraudulent records, and a coming investigation by the State Labor Board. In the executive suite upstairs, panic had replaced arrogance. Gerald paced by the window, jaw tight, while Thomas barked into his phone with corporate lawyers. Documents were being shredded in the finance office, and the HR director was preparing a company-wide email that said everything and nothing at the same time. Internally, they blamed a rogue employee. But the truth was, Rosa had triggered something far bigger than any of them could contain. She had used her anonymity to her advantage. Every access card she used, every document she copied, every hallway she walked unnoticed. It had all been preparation for this moment. Still dressed in her navy blue uniform, Rosa pushed her mop bucket into the break room. It was empty, except for Ramon, a young janitor from the night shift who hadn't left yet. He looked up, eyes wide. "That was you, wasn't it?" he asked softly. Rosa gave a small nod. Ramon's expression changed, surprise giving way to something deeper. Respect. "They're scared," he said. "I saw Gerald yelling at 2 lawyers like they were interns." She didn't reply. Instead, she took a small envelope from her coat pocket and slid it across the table to him. "It's a copy of the original employee bonus records," she said. "Names, dates, figures. It proves everything. Keep it safe. And if anything happens to me, send it to the press again." Ramon nodded. He didn't ask questions. That afternoon, Rosa entered the janitor's supply closet and pulled a metal storage box from beneath the sink. Inside were older files, some handwritten by Luis, others bearing signatures of board meetings from years ago. She placed them in a duffel bag, zipped it closed, and walked out without a word. At City Hall, David was already meeting with an investigator from the labor board. Rosa handed over the documents and stood back. It felt surreal, watching others now act on what she had carried alone for so many years. "They'll subpoena internal records next," David whispered. "And once they verify the bonus fraud, it opens the door for your claim on the shares." "It's happening." Rosa didn't smile. Not yet. She returned to work that evening as usual. She swept the marble floor in the lobby while reporters camped outside the revolving doors. She emptied trash bins in the break room while emails buzzed between board members. She wiped conference tables while executives whispered about resignations. That night, the silence in the building wasn't ordinary. It was heavy, tense, like the air before a storm breaks. Just before midnight, Rosa stood alone in the main boardroom, staring out at the city lights. She wasn't cleaning. She was watching the skyline, her reflection faint in the window. For a long time, she had lived in the shadows of men who built empires on broken promises. But now the empire was cracking. And in the silence, she could finally hear her own voice. It didn't roar. It didn't beg. It stood steady. And it was just getting started. The boardroom smelled of fresh citrus polish and fear. 3 days had passed since the story broke, and Celestial Pacific Logistics was bleeding from every angle. Clients had begun to suspend contracts. Shareholders were demanding emergency meetings. A state investigator had been spotted entering the building with a folder under his arm and a grim expression on his face. That morning, Rosa received an unexpected message. It came through the intercom in the janitor's hallway. "Ms. Martinez, please report to the executive suite. Gerald Foster would like to speak with you privately." For a moment, she stood frozen. She knew this would come eventually, but the speed of it caught her off guard. Still, she cleaned her hands, straightened her uniform, and walked with quiet resolve to the elevator reserved for executives. As the elevator climbed, the walls hummed softly. The higher she rose, the clearer her reflection became in the polished chrome. When the doors opened, Gerald was waiting. He looked smaller now, his confidence cracked by sleepless nights and phone calls from lawyers. But his voice, when he spoke, still carried the tone of a man used to getting what he wanted. "Please, sit." Rosa didn't. She remained standing, watching him with the same calm expression she wore while scrubbing floors. Gerald sighed. "We know you leaked the documents. We also know who your husband was. We didn't realize you were." that close to the original founder. She said nothing. We've reviewed the old agreements. If proven, they'll hold up in court. Technically, legally, you're entitled to his shares. He paused. But you don't want to drag this out in court, do you? Could take years. Depositions, legal fees, public spectacle. And think of the stress on your family. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick folder, slid it across the glass table. And there is an offer. One-time settlement. 7 figures. We'll also issue a public apology on behalf of the company. All you need to do is sign and walk away. Rosa didn't open the folder. You're offering to pay me to disappear, she said. Gerald leaned back. We're offering to resolve this like professionals. Quietly. Dignity intact. She stepped forward, placed one hand on the table, and looked him dead in the eyes. My husband built this company. His hands were in the concrete foundation of the first warehouse. He died with nothing because you and your people rewrote his history. Do you think dignity is your currency now? Gerald's expression changed just slightly. A flicker of discomfort. Don't make this personal, he warned. It already is. Rosa turned and walked out, leaving the folder unopened. That night David called. They're scared, he said. This offer means they know the evidence is airtight. But they're still trying to hold the reins. They won't, Rosa replied. Not for long. The next day, an emergency shareholders meeting was announced. The company's valuation had dropped 20%. 2 executives resigned. Anonymous sources leaked that whistleblower protections were being extended internally, prompting more employees to come forward. And Rosa? She kept showing up in her Navy uniform, mop bucket in hand, moving silently through the storm. At home, she sat at her kitchen table late into the night, sorting through Louis' old notebooks. They were filled with notes, drawings, even dreams he'd once had for the company. He had planned community investments, fair wages, a workers' equity plan. They had mocked those ideas. Now Rosa laid them out like blueprints. She wasn't just after justice. She was building something. She was reclaiming it. And whether the board accepted it or not, she was already stepping into power, one floor at a time. A warm breeze swept through Oakland the morning of the shareholder vote. From the outside, Celestial Pacific Logistics looked the same, glass walls shining under the sun, delivery trucks humming across the lot. But inside, the foundation was shifting. Rosa arrived early, not to clean but to stand. This time, she wore a navy blue suit. Not the janitor uniform she'd worn for over a decade, but something new, tailored, still simple. She didn't want to look like them. She wanted to look like herself, but on her terms. At the front gate, the security guard gave her a small nod. She nodded back. Inside the building, Gerald and the remaining executives paced the marble lobby, phones pressed to ears, murmuring into corners. Rosa's presence didn't go unnoticed. Whispers followed her like shadows. The shareholder meeting was held in the main auditorium. Rows of chairs filled with anxious investors, analysts, and legal advisors. At the front, a long table draped in company colors displayed the board members, each seated stiffly behind nameplates. When Rosa entered, the room quieted. She walked steadily down the center aisle, then stopped before the board. Her voice was calm but rang clear through the microphone. My name is Rosa Martinez. I am the legal beneficiary of Luis Martinez, the true founder of this company. You erased him. You buried his work and claimed it as your own. But I have the papers. I have the journals. I have the truth. And now, I am reclaiming my seat at this table. The lead counsel for the board stood. There are protocols for claims like these, Ms. Martinez. Courts. The court of public opinion has already begun its deliberation, she cut in. But if you want it official, then fine. Let's do it official. She lifted a thick binder from her bag and set it on the table. Original shareholder contracts. A notarized letter from Louis' former partner confirming the transfer of shares before his death. Full documentation of the whistleblower complaint, signed and time-stamped. A murmur rose in the audience. Cameras clicked. Phones buzzed. The board conferred in tight whispers. Gerald's face turned pale, his jaw clenched. But the tide had already turned. A woman in the third row stood up, an early investor, Rosa later learned. I motion for a reorganization of the board, she said, including reinstatement of shares to Rosa Martinez. Another voice echoed her. Then another. A vote was called. And in the span of minutes, everything changed. Rosa didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply took her seat at the table while Gerald was escorted out of the room, silent and stunned. Later that day, the headlines erupted. Janitor turned whistleblower claims control of logistics giant. Rosa Martinez, the woman who took back the company. But Rosa didn't go to the press. She went home. She sat on her porch, shoes off, watching the sun lower behind the bay. In her lap rested one of Luis' final notebooks. Inside, he had sketched a floor plan labeled The People's Office. It was a circular design. No corner offices. No locked doors. She traced the lines with her fingers. The next morning, she walked through the headquarters not as a cleaner, but as the new acting chair. She didn't take the top office. She kept moving, talking to workers, listening, redesigning. One of the first things she did was remove the executive-only elevator. From that point forward, everyone rose together. 2 weeks after the boardroom coup, the walls of Celestial Pacific Logistics still echoed with disbelief. Rosa Martinez had become more than a name whispered in break rooms. She was now the voice on the intercom, the signature on new policies, the presence that walked the halls without pretense. Her first act as acting chair wasn't a speech. It was an invitation. A message went out to every employee, from warehouse drivers to call center reps to cleaning staff. No suits. No podium. Just a plain email with a time, a room number, and a line that read, "If you work here, I want to hear from you." The conference room filled quickly. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of curiosity. For some, it was their first time on the 6th floor. For others, the first time they'd seen a company leader without a barrier in between. Rosa stood at the front with a whiteboard, marker in hand. "Tell me what's broken," she said. "Tell me what no one's been listening to." Silence at first. Then a forklift operator raised his hand. "Routes are too long. We don't get proper rest breaks." Rosa wrote it down. A receptionist spoke next. "Our benefits barely cover anything. My daughter's inhaler costs more than a paycheck." Rosa nodded, kept writing. A janitor in the back, a young woman named Kayla, stood up slowly. "They locked the storage rooms during night shift. We don't have supplies half the time." Rosa wrote that too. They spoke for over an hour. No one interrupted. No one dismissed a word. And Rosa, true to her promise, didn't forget. In the following days, policies began to shift. Routes were restructured. A fleet scheduling system was upgraded to reduce overloads. The benefits package was renegotiated. Within 3 weeks, copays dropped, mental health coverage expanded, and child care stipends were introduced. Kayla's complaint led to a revamp of the janitorial supply system. Locked doors were removed. Night shift staff received new equipment and hazard pay adjustments. Rosa didn't stop there. She launched a rotation program allowing employees from any department to shadow others. Warehouse workers sat in on planning meetings. Office staff rode in delivery trucks. For the first time, people started seeing the business beyond their silos. It changed conversations. It changed attitudes. And slowly it changed the culture. But not everyone embraced it. The old guard pushed back quietly at first. Some executives who had survived the board purge began dragging their feet. Budget proposals were delayed for review. Meeting invites lost in the system. A quiet resistance formed, led by those who saw Rosa not as a leader but as a threat. One afternoon, she found herself alone in the elevator with Richard Yates, the chief operating officer. He had a face like polished stone and a voice trained for passive control. "You're moving too fast," he said without looking at her. "I'm moving at the speed of overdue," she replied. He smiled thinly. "This isn't a community center, Rosa. It's a corporation. People expect returns." She looked him in the eye. "Returns come from people who aren't afraid to show up whole. I'm investing in them. That's the long game." He chuckled, shook his head, and got off at the next floor without another word. That evening, Rosa sat in her office, lights low, staring at the city below. She knew the backlash was coming. There were rumors of a vote to censure her, an effort to slow down her changes, to reassert control from the top. But Rosa wasn't afraid. She'd walked too far in silence to be silenced now. The following week, she scheduled a town hall. This time, the venue was the shipping yard, outdoors among the trucks and forklifts. Folding chairs lined up in rows under strings of warehouse lights. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. She stepped up to a pallet that doubled as a stage. "I've heard the whispers," she said. "They say I'm doing too much. That I'm rocking the boat." She paused, scanning the crowd. Good. Boats weren't made to sit still. They were made to carry people forward. And this time we're all on board. The applause started slowly but grew into something real. Even the skeptical ones, the hesitant ones, began to feel it. The shift wasn't just in policy. It was in presence. Rosa didn't just change what people were allowed to say, she changed what they believed could be possible. And in doing so, she uncovered something deeper. The people weren't broken. They'd just never been believed before. The storm didn't come with thunder or rain. It came through inboxes, boardrooms, and veiled threats behind polished smiles. One morning, Rosa found a memo slipped under her office door, unsigned but unmistakably official. A motion had been filed by several board members to review the structural changes implemented by the acting chair. The language was careful, but the intent was clear. They were coming for her authority. The same people who had watched her rise now conspired to reverse it. She wasn't surprised, but she was ready. By now, Rosa had built more than momentum. She had allies. Not all wore suits. In fact, most didn't. Truck drivers, dispatchers, floor supervisors, even contract workers. People who had once moved quietly through hallways were now writing letters, signing petitions, organizing informal meetings after shifts. They called it the ground crew, a loose but growing collective of employees who supported Rosa's vision. Word spread that a vote of no confidence was being planned. The board's strategy was classic: question the financial impact of Rosa's reforms, claim instability, and appeal to shareholders' fears. Rosa requested a formal hearing. They granted it. The meeting was set for a Thursday. A cold, dry morning with wind sweeping through the downtown streets of Oakland. Rosa arrived early, a plain gray blazer over her usual work clothes. No stylist. No spokesperson. Just her. Inside the boardroom, 12 seats circled a long, lacquered table. At the far end sat Milton Grayson, once her biggest opponent, now turned supporter. Across from him, Richard Yates and two other board members whispered as Rosa walked in. She nodded but didn't smile. The chair of the meeting, a man named Lucien Paul, old San Francisco money and a master of corporate chess, called it to order. We are here to discuss recent concerns regarding executive overreach and policy destabilization under the current acting leadership. Rosa stood before they could elaborate. There's no destabilization, she said. There's only discomfort. Because for the first time, people at the bottom of this company are being treated like they matter. Lucien raised a hand. Ms. Martinez, if we could. I'm not done, she interrupted calmly. She turned to the room, to each face. I've read your concerns. You say the numbers don't lie. So let's talk numbers. She pulled a folder from her bag and handed copies around the table. Quarterly turnover, down 22%. Delivery efficiency, up by 15. Employee sick days reduced by a third. Customer retention, up nearly 10 points. What? Because when people are cared for, they care back. That's not disruption. That's progress. Silence. Lucien skimmed the papers with a furrowed brow. Then Richard Yates leaned back, fingers steepled. You've made improvements, Rosa. No one denies that. But leadership isn't just about goodwill. It's about governance. About structure. If every worker starts believing they have a say in direction, what happens to command? What happens to control? Rosa looked directly at him. Maybe control isn't the point anymore. She stepped back, took a breath. This company was built by hands that never touched that boardroom table. It survived because of people who were never invited into that elevator. It's time their work was honored with more than slogans. It's time their stories shaped the story. There was quiet then. Not just in the room, but across the company. Because the hearing had been streamed. Every break room, loading dock, dispatch center, and regional office had it on screen. And when Rosa finished, a shift manager in Fresno stood up and clapped. Then a team in San Diego joined. Then Phoenix. Then Sacramento. The vote that followed wasn't unanimous. But it was decisive. The board withdrew the motion. Rosa was confirmed as permanent chair by a vote of 7-5. Later that evening, alone in the darkened office once occupied by her late husband, Rosa opened the window and let the wind carry the stale air out. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She lit a small candle and placed it by the photo of Gabriel that still sat on the corner of the desk. I didn't fix it all, she whispered. But I started. Outside, the streetlights flickered to life. Far below, the night shift was beginning. Forklifts moving in rhythm, lights glowing like constellations across the yard. The company was still working. Still moving forward. Not led from above, but lifted from below. The end. Here are 7 moral lessons drawn from this story. 1. True leadership is rooted in service, not status. Rosa Martinez did not climb her way to the top by stepping over others. She rose by standing among them, shoulder to shoulder, as one of their own. Even when she became chair of the board, she never abandoned her work clothes or the humility that came with her years as a janitor. The lesson here is powerful. Leadership is not about being above people but about lifting others with you. It is not measured by how many follow your orders, but by how many grow because of your guidance. Rosa served her team, and because of that, they stood behind her when it mattered most. In a world obsessed with hierarchy, she proved that service builds trust far stronger than authority ever could. 2. Dignity does not depend on a job title. From the warehouse floors to the executive suite, Rosa treated everyone with the same respect. She reminded us that dignity is not something given only to those with degrees, office badges, or corner offices. It belongs to everyone regardless of their role. For years, she cleaned the very building that later bore her name on the executive list. Yet she never saw her job as beneath her. She saw it as necessary, honorable work. And through her journey, the story reminds us to never dismiss someone based on their occupation. A title can tell you what someone does, cannot tell you who they are. 3. Justice can begin in silence, but must end in action. Rosa stayed quiet for years after her husband's death, enduring injustice, grief, and rumors in silence. But when the time came to act, she did so with unshakable purpose. She investigated what others ignored. She stood up when she could have stepped back. Her courage reminds us that while it's okay to process quietly, change only happens when silence is broken. Justice does not shout at first, it watches, it waits, it listens. But in the end, it must rise and speak. Rosa's transformation from quiet observer to fearless reformer teaches us that the most powerful actions often begin in stillness, but they do not end there. 4. Reform requires both courage and strategy. Rosa didn't just challenge a broken system, she replaced it with something better. She didn't just call out exploitation, she built fairness into the foundation of the company. This lesson is critical. It is easy to criticize. It is much harder to rebuild. Rosa showed that reform isn't only about anger or outrage, it's about vision, discipline, and persistent work. She organized labor, negotiated with executives, and introduced practical policies that improved lives. Lasting change demands more than passion. It requires plans, allies, and unshakable resolve. 5. The truth, once uncovered, demands accountability. When Rosa discovered the corruption surrounding her husband's death, she did not let fear or personal pain silence her. She pursued the truth no matter how uncomfortable it made those in power. She confronted people who had built walls of denial and secrecy for years. The lesson here is sobering. Truth is not always welcome, but it is necessary. And when truth emerges, accountability must follow. Rosa teaches us that exposing wrongdoing is only half the battle. The other half is ensuring that those who cause harm are held responsible, and that the system does not forget what it allowed. 6. Collective strength outweighs individual ambition. The story is not just Rosa's victory. It is the victory of every warehouse worker, janitor, shift lead, and driver who believed in her and stood beside her. They created the ground crew not as a protest, but as a community. This shows us that real power doesn't come from titles or wealth. It comes from unity. The people at the bottom, often ignored, formed the backbone of the movement that reshaped the company. Their support, their letters, their voices made the difference. When people come together around a shared cause, even the most rigid institutions must listen. 7. Healing does not erase pain, but it builds new purpose. Rosa never forgot Gabriel. She never replaced him, and she never pretended the pain was gone. But through her work, she honored his memory in a way that transcended mourning. By transforming the very company that once symbolized her loss, she turned grief into purpose. This final lesson is deeply human. Healing does not mean forgetting. It means choosing to do something meaningful with the wounds we carry. Rosa's candle in the final chapter isn't just a tribute, it's a promise that our losses can light the way forward. That pain, when faced, can shape something more powerful than fear, purpose. These 7 lessons from the floor below the glass ceiling are not just about corporate reform or individual triumph. They speak to something universal, the belief that dignity, justice, and courage belong to all of us, no matter where we begin. And that even from the lowest floor, one can rise, not just to break ceilings but to rebuild what lies above. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The purpose of this video is to provide moral lessons, motivation, inspiration, and other forms of learning for viewers. It is not intended to represent factual information or real-life accounts. And that was The Floor Below the Glass Ceiling. A story not just about a woman rising to power, but about every quiet soul who's ever been underestimated, every worker whose name was never known, every dream that waited in silence for the right time to speak. If you've stayed with us till now, thank you. May your journey be blessed with clarity and courage. May your voice be heard in the rooms that matter. May you always be surrounded by people who see your worth. And may every difficulty you face turn into strength and wisdom. If you are sick, may healing find you. If you are tired, may peace cover you. And if you are struggling, may unexpected help arrive exactly when you need it most. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, leave a comment below. Tell us which part stayed with you or share a story of someone who inspired you from the shadows. Your voice matters here. Until next time, remember, sometimes the person sweeping the floor is the one who built the foundation.